Okay, Mark, you have the floor. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I assume it is morning where most of you are, maybe afternoon, but hello anyway. So my name's Mark Neal. I'm an associate professor in innovation and entrepreneurship at the Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Bristol, which is where I know Jen from. My role there really is to work with all the student startups and help them have impact in the world. So what I want to do is share with you some slides, a lot of which I've actually used with my students in Bristol. Some of them are not my students, some of them are just startups. It's obviously meant for students, but I kind of think that you folks are starting out on the entrepreneurial journey, and all the work that I've done all over the world. I've worked with about 4,000 or 5,000 startups in different parts of the world, mostly, well, a fair number of them in sub-Saharan Africa, but not as far south as South Africa. And I'm struck by how similar the problems there are all over the world. And I think in Africa in particular, the challenges are around access to resources are more acute than in other parts of the world. But actually, the challenges of engaging with humans are pretty similar. So what I want to do really is talk a little bit about where you go to find funding. And as I'll share in the kind of first slide, if I can actually get this to move, I can get the slides to move on. How do I do that? Is this one. The scary thing is the easiest way to raise funding is actually not to need it. Now that, of course, poses a big problem for the people who actually need to raise funding. So in many ways, what I'm going to talk about today is how to make it obvious that you don't need it. And part of that's about the pitching, and part of it's about being really clear that you have a lot of people who are desperate for your product to succeed. And if you have a lot of people who are desperate for your product to succeed, then it should be relatively easy to find people along the way who are willing to help you bring that product to market. And when I look at the success stories that come out of Bristol, the ones that have really succeeded are the ones who've engaged their audience the best. And it's their audience that have given them the confidence to go out to investors and various other people, because investors can really quickly see that they're destined for success. So the way to not need funding is to show that actually you could do it without investors, and then investors come on board because they're frightened that they're going to miss out on this wonderful opportunity that you folks are creating. So my message to you when it comes to getting finance is be confident. And I know that sounds easy to say and is very difficult to do in practice, but you're worth it. And you have to remember that you're worth it. If you've got a product that you can show loads of people really want, then investors need you more than you need them. So let's just talk through what that looks like. So I spoke to Jen earlier, and she did talk a little bit about Sarasvathi's work, what makes entrepreneurs entrepreneurial. But the way I describe it is this way. You've got lots of doors that you could go knocking on. Knock on as many of them as you possibly can. Spread your message. Say, look, I recognize that there is a problem here that people are looking for a solution to. Are you interested? And the ones that slam the door in your face, well, never mind. It was never going to happen. So no matter how hard you might have tried to pitch to them, if they're not interested, move on, pick the next door and the next door. And if necessary, the one after that. By the time you've got to maybe the green or the red door, you'll probably find someone who says words to the effective, you're the person I've been waiting for all my life. Now, I'm slightly over dramatizing here, but hopefully you get the message that a lot of it is about resonance. And when your message resonates with the person behind one of those doors, you will go a lot further. So don't worry about the ones that don't open. Worry about the ones that do and how you can maximize that relationship, because people who love your message will give you the resources. And resources doesn't just mean money, but it also means the time and effort to research your product, to get it in such a way that it becomes the obvious choice for the right customers, and how you know who they are and what it is that they want. So let's move on. I'm just going to quickly nip into pitching and then we'll come back to funding in a minute. So this is Chris Lipp, who's quite well known as a pitch coach. And this is how he describes it. You begin with the problem or the need that you're addressing, then move on to the solution. The market are the people who want it. And finally, the business is the way that you're going to capture that market. So essentially, problem, solution, and customer, get those bits nailed. And if you can prove that there is a problem that your target market want and that your solution will deliver the outcome that they're looking for, then finally, how do we actually turn this into an investment opportunity? Now, investment opportunity I use in the broadest sense of the word. Some of you may well be doing things which are more socially minded. And an investment opportunity for a philanthropist is someone who delivers the outcome that they really want to see in the world. So in many ways, whether it's a social or for-profit venture that you're working on, the principles are pretty much exactly the same. I hope that makes sense. I want to make this interactive, so I'm just going to stop for a second, and if there's any questions, please do ask them. Either speak out. Jenny, I don't know how you want to do this, whether you want to get them in the chat and corral them and ask them to me, or just get people to speak.
Yeah, you can unmute and speak or put it in the chat and we'll read it out, whichever one suits you.
Okay, so shall I assume that if no one interjects, I just carry on?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's do that. But please, I do encourage you to interject. It's very easy for me to stand on my podium and pontificate, but that's not what I'm about. If you're not getting stuff from it, then we're all wasting our time. So here's the challenge. The challenge is to find the stakeholders who, one, most want your solution, and two, have the resources to make it happen. So I've picked a picture here. Here's a boy who's pulling his hair out. He is so desperate and he is frustrated. I've picked this picture for several reasons. One is because I'm sort of vaguely hoping to appeal to your maternal instincts. Okay, so you may not have much to share with this particular chap. You don't know who he is. But hopefully you're starting to see that this is someone who's desperate. Now, the reason for wanting to appeal to your maternal instincts is because this is all about emotion. If you can create an emotional response out of the people that you're talking to, you're far more likely to develop the kind of empathy that says, this is someone I really want to help. And I'm not talking about the boy in this case, I'm talking about you folks. Because if your job is to make this boy happier, and there are people who want that to happen, and they recognize that it's a problem, they want you to succeed, and they're already on your side. So what I want you to do is I want you to spend a couple of minutes just thinking about this. And I'm sure you've done this already, but who is it that feels the problem you're solving most acutely? And the second point here is, how will you reach them and grab their attention? Because if you can find people who feel that problem, they want it solved, and they've got the resources to help you, and you get your message in front of them, then they will. And even if it's only a very fluffy and ill-articulated problem, and there are a bunch of people who there think, yeah, you're onto something there, I'm kind of interested in helping you. A lot of our students in the early stages, they just gathered a group, what I call a tribe of people around them. And I mean that in the sense of a group of people with a common purpose, a community, if you like, of people who are interested in the same thing and have some kind of cultural similarity in terms of the way they see the world. And they get these folks around them and they help them articulate it in such a way that even really wild and wacky problems that people never thought of before, they can communicate them in a way that people say, yeah, I get that. I've never heard anyone talk about it before. Tell me more. I want to know. I want to help. And then they actually co-produce a solution with these folks. And then they get something that really resonates with people like them because they've got multiple minds thinking about it. Now, these are the kind of resources that you want really early on in the entrepreneurial journey, because they'll help you shape and articulate your proposition in such a way that it resonates with the most people. So have a think about this. And I don't know if any of you want to share your thoughts on who feels the problem you're solving most acutely, how you're going to reach them, and for the benefit of me who doesn't know anything about what you're doing other than a very brief slide, just tell us briefly what your product is. Is anyone willing to share some of that? And then maybe the rest of us can give some feedback on how well it resonates with us.
Okay, Mark, there's a question. It's about the doors you showed us earlier on the slides and
Yes.
storytelling. So the question is, do I need to change my story when I go about knocking on each door to suit whoever is behind that door?
I think the answer to that is actually yes, up to the point that if you're starting to go in completely different direction, then that's not the right door for you. But in terms of the way you describe it, and in terms of the way you talk about the way you might deliver the product, what that product might look like, then I think the answer is yes. The biggest challenge, and I'm sure this has been shared with you before, the biggest reason for startups to fail is that they create a product that nobody wants. Now, you might think, but how can anyone be that stupid? And of course, they're not that stupid. The problem is we can't see inside our customers' heads. So if someone's saying to you, well, I kind of like what you're doing, but if it had this rather than that, and one of those instead of one of these, that would make it a lot more interesting for me. Are you changing your story, or are you allowing your product to emerge to suit the market? And I think the answer to your question is, if it's the wrong door and they're saying, well, I'm not interested unless it's in orange, and you know perfectly well that nobody else wants it in orange, and forgive me for using a silly example to prove the point, then don't change your story. But if people are saying, you know what, I really love what you're trying to do, but if you could tweak it this way or that way, it would make it so much more convincing for me, then I think you want to be listening to them and really evaluating whether actually that's very sensible advice. Because the number of people who go down to the end of a kind of dead end and keep banging their head on the end of the brick wall, desperate for it to break down in front of them, all they end up with is a sore head. So if the market's telling you you're going in the wrong direction, listen. You've probably heard that before, but it's amazing how many people just don't get that.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question? I hope
Yes.
so. Okay, is there anyone who's willing to share what problem they're solving and for whom and how they think they might reach them?
Hi. Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Let's do a bit of peer mentoring here, because I don't have all the answers. I'm going to let your colleagues really talk about what they think about it. Go for it.
Okay. So I'm building a ready-to-play Christian games, and the problem that is solving is in a fun way, people are able to learn about the Bible. And I think the people who will be interested are Christian investors or investors who are in the inclusion and diversity space, who like invest in underrepresented groups, also gaming investors, and I'd like to push it to edutech investors. And just talking about how you just commented about switching in different forms of investing, I could switch it to kind of suit those different ones. So like in the edutech investors, probably switch it to show how it's more of a learning tool that is fun. And then with the gaming investors, I'm literally calling it what it is, a game. And then for the inclusive and diversity investors, I'm talking about how Christians, a product that is just for Christians is still like a niche market because it's not gaming for everyone. So that could probably point out in that direction. And then for Christian investors, already it's a Christian product.
So is there anyone else on the call who either wants to ask a question or wants to comment about whether they think this is something that resonates based on their experience?
Good morning.
Go for it.
Okay, so based on her business idea she shared, I actually think I understand the business, and I think it would be something which would go well on the market because yeah, there are games everywhere. People play games, but personally, I haven't really seen a Christian game that helps to learn about the Bible and improve your knowledge about Christianity. So I think if this is a good business idea that would go well for, especially like she said, the Christian society as a whole. Yeah. So I actually like the idea. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And do you know anyone that she should speak to?
Okay, so she said based on what you said earlier, various doors, the way you propose your business to various people when you approach various investors. So I would say if it depends on how the platform she's building would look, there are like LMS investors. Okay, so let me use Udacity. So there's how the platform would be, and investors or owners of Udacity, Coursera, Udemy would want to invest in it because it's still a way of educating the society and improving knowledge and all of that. So depends on how the platform is, she could reach out to others of other kind of learning management systems. Even fintech founders and fintech investors would also want to do that because it's a way, yeah, even virtual reality investors too. So people that are interested in virtual reality could say, okay, not just gaming with pads and all of that. You can you can do the gaming with VR, and those that are interested in VR could also invest in this to make it more enhanced. So I think VR specialists, fintech specialists, because they would want to use it to for payments and online payments to make money and all of that. So fintech, VR, and various LMS investors, I think they would work for this.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing here is that effectively you're using gamification as an engagement tool. And the problem that you're really articulating is that people are not particularly engaging in the kind of subject matter that you're talking about as much as they could. But if you make it a lot more accessible to them, then they're going to engage a great deal more. So the real question is, who is it that's worrying about the lack of engagement? And your colleagues there just talked about the platforms, Udacity, Coursera. These are businesses that make money out of people engaging out of education. So I can see an obvious fit there, that if you can sell your solution to those folks, and it means they sell more online courses, then there is an obvious benefit to them. So the challenge then is to articulate this in such a way that they can see how it will benefit their business. Do you see how this works? Understanding really the problem from the perspective of a very specific customer, right? That they can identify and say, oh, if you could do that to my business, I'm all over it. A lot of the challenge and the reason why people end up creating products that nobody wants isn't that the products in themselves are no good. It's that people simply don't understand the benefits in their own very specific contexts. So what we need to be doing here is talking to people in a language that they understand, and I don't mean that in terms of the whether it's English or some other language. It's much more in the cultural vernacular, in the language that is used in that particular community, and the things that are important in that particular community. And you really do need to micro segment when you're doing this. Anyone that says that their product applies to everyone is deluding themselves, unfortunately, because the only way you can describe a product that applies to everyone is in such bland ways that it is completely undifferentiated and you sound exactly the same as everyone else. So this is the challenge that we're trying to get to. Thank you for that. And forgive the slightly crude image, But what I'm really saying here is when you can show that lots of people are desperate for your product, it's easier to get funding. Now, what you need to be doing is you need to be going around talking to these people and saying, okay, if I was to provide another one of these facilities, I think you can draw your own conclusions about what this facility is. How much would you be willing to pay for it? And then you can do that, and we'll come on to this in a minute. You could use that for crowdfunding, or you could take that to an investor and say, look, if I was to put another one of those things next door, people would pay me this much for it, that you'd get your money back in next to no time. And then it's easy. That is your challenge, to demonstrate real demand for it. Hopefully that all makes sense. So let me just talk about some of the key sources of funding, and then we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about how to present your ideas in the most, engaging way possible. So I'm sure you've all heard of crowdfunding, but essentially the way crowdfunding works is you make a promise to your audience here, and you say, look, we've got this product. All our research shows that people like you will really like it. The only problem is I can't make it just yet because I haven't got the money to do it. So if you give me some money now, if 50 of you give me some money now, then I can actually go and make the product, and I can, I'll sort of sell it for you for half price. So you give me the money up front, and then you can be the first on the list to actually get this product when it's out there. And if you can get 50 to 100 people to prepay, then that gives you the funding to actually deliver, if not an MVP, a minimum viable product, at least something that demonstrates that you're on the road to success, that you're building something. So that's the first place to look. Next place to look, and I'm going down the list here, this is in no particular order, is a philanthropist. Again, particularly for socially minded things, philanthropists are very keen on righting what they perceive to be as wrong. So if you can find the philanthropist that agrees with you in terms of what you see to be wrong, and they want to help it happen, philanthropists are particularly good for paying for things which customers can't themselves pay for. Where people either don't have the resources or the funds or the access to be able to do this. So if you can actually get your product in front of people who otherwise couldn't afford to pay for it, philanthropists are very keen to help out. Next up, moving up to the top there, and angel investors. So angel investors are generally people who have already made some money out of products in the space that's similar to you. So find the folks who've sold products that are really good in your space, and maybe approach them and say, oh, look, I see you've had some real success in whatever your particular product is. I've got an idea that could take it a stage further or fills a gap that your product didn't necessarily address. And the advantage of an angel investor over just someone with a checkbook is that they understand the market, they've been in it, they know the things that you are likely to discover later, but they can, accelerate your knowledge in that space, and they know other people who are likely to be able to help you with resources. So angel investors, not only do they give you some money, but they really give you a lot of expertise, some of which you just can't buy for money. So they're really well worth thinking about. Next up is loan capital. So I've just really distinguished here between loan capital and venture capital because they're very different beasts. So loan capital is when you go to a bank or something like that and say, look, I want to borrow this much money. I'll give it back to you over the next 5 years at this much a month at this rate of interest. That's not particularly difficult to understand conceptually. The key thing that the lenders want to know is that you're going to be able to pay it back. So if you've got your business plan, you can show, here's all these customers. If you spend some money on this, that will enable you to, it will unlock, if you like, a revenue stream of all of these people who are desperate for your product, but they can't have it because until you've got some money, you can't make it for them or you can't deliver it to them. And it's a very simple transactional arrangement. They really don't care about what your product is, but they do care that they'll get their money back because that's what they have to demonstrate. So if you can prove that you can give them their money back with the interest, then they're very happy. I put there a low cost of capital, but all the risk is yours, because if it doesn't go to plan, you end up with this debt. Now, okay, to a certain extent, with a limited company, you can avoid that because you can declare yourself bankrupt. But if you do that, that's going to make it incredibly difficult to get any funding in the future. So, most people could walk away from their debts, but most people really don't want to if they are committed as entrepreneurs. So contrast that with venture capital. So venture capital, they'll buy shares in your business, and they'll buy them at dirt cheap prices when your prospects are not looking nearly so good, and they'll sell them when your company is worth 10 to 100 times as much. So if you think about it, if you sell a stake of 10% of your business and the business is worth $100, then they're giving you $10. Yep. If in 5 years' time it's not worth 100, but it's worth $100,000, then you're giving them $10,000. So compare that to borrowing, $100 at 10% interest, where you give back $10 effectively. You're giving many multiples of the amount that they give you back if you're successful. But the flip side of that is that if you go bust, you walk away with nothing. You've got no debts coming after you. So the ideal time when you want to get venture capital is when you're very unsure that you're going to succeed. But of course, from the venture capitalist perspective, the only way they'll give you any money is when they're absolutely convinced that you will succeed. So you kind of have to square that circle with them. Okay, and the final one here, and this is something that I've really been doing some research on, is what I call a motivated market. And again, thinking back to some of the real success stories of the entrepreneurs that have come out of the University of Bristol amongst their students, they have developed a motivated market. Perhaps the most famous example is Hazel and Amber, who've created a product called Pequel. And the story of them, Jen, I don't know if you've told them about Pequel. If you have, then I won't say it again. But
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. So their observation was that when women went to festivals, they had to queue for a lot longer than men. Now, I don't know if festivals resonates very much in your markets, but in the UK, on the occasions when we get sunshine in the summer, lots of people go to outdoor music events. And so they sort of camp, and then they go to watch the musicians on the various stages. And of course, because of the way, well, how do I put this? The anatomy of men and women is somewhat different, which means that when you need to pee, it's more complicated for women, should we say? And so the result of that was that there was lots more queues. So what Hazel and Amber said to their colleagues was, look, okay, I'm looking for a solution to this because I think it's unfair. And they found a whole heap of other people who said, yeah, you know what, it is unfair. And they actually had up to 100 people giving them of their time so that they could research this product. And essentially, it's a urinal for women, and you'll appreciate the difference in the way people work. And essentially, it's something that that the women squat over rather than stand up for, but it's very easy for them to use. Now, this is a really wild and wacky concept, and the only way they could make it work is by having lots of people trying out various things. And I've got some crazy images of them at student parties where they got the women to pretend they were doing a wild pee, i.e. what they could do if they couldn't find appropriate facilities, when they'd had lots of beer, which is exactly what happens after a festival. I don't know if it was beer, wine, or whatever it was. So they were a little bit unsteady on their feet and they were squatting. And from that, they worked out exactly where they needed to put handholds so that the poor women, when they'd had a few too many and were squatting, didn't fall over in an ungainly heap. So they ended up with a product that was so incredibly intuitive that women were a bit skeptical. Everybody knows that urinals aren't meant for women. And so then they tried it, and it was just so intuitive to them that they thought, why haven't I had this all my life? And in a way, that's what you're looking for with your product. Something that no one thought was possible, but when they see it, they wonder why they've never had it all these years. And the motivated market essentially is a group of people who are so desperate for you to succeed because they want that problem solved, they will give you lots and lots of free resources. They'll give you their time, they'll open their kind of address book. We don't have address books these days, but you get what I mean. They'll knock on doors for you. They'll do crowdfunding for you, support crowdfunding campaigns. And this is a way of bootstrapping, but bootstrapping in such a way that you're effectively creating a movement around your product, and a movement of such strength that it can go nowhere but towards success, even if not necessarily in the way that you're thinking. So I've done quite a lot of research on this motivated market, and it's incredibly powerful for people who are starting out with no resources. And essentially, it's a means of co-creating your product so that you work with prospective customers right from the word go, and you shape it around what they say that they'll be willing to most support and most pay for.
Mark,
So
is this the same as market research?
it's a form of market research. So you can do market research in many, many different ways. I think one of the most common is to do a survey. The fundamental problem with doing a survey, of course, is what if you're asking the wrong question? What if the killer question is one that it hasn't occurred to you to ask? So if you work in a much more dialogical way with your prospective customers, and then you kind of invite them to drive the agenda, you'll learn a heck of a lot about things that you'd never even thought about to ask. And this, particularly if you're wanting to do something that's innovative, is really helpful. I don't want to get into the psychology of all of this, but I will if you really want me to. But what I would say is we're all creatures
Go
of
into it.
experience.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Please talk about the psychology of it.
Okay, right. So the point is we're all creatures driven by our own experiences. And no matter what, you're all here because you're interested in entrepreneurship. But if you think about your backgrounds, if you think about the way you see the world, it's been shaped by everything that you've experienced in your life. The problem with that is, A, it's invisible to everyone else, and B, in many ways, it's invisible to you too, because something like 90% of what we do is driven by habit. It's not driven by conscious thought. And if someone asked you why you're doing something that you're doing and that you weren't even thinking about it, you may not even know that you're doing it. And so when you ask customers what they want, it may be that they can't tell you because it's never occurred to them that this is a gap in their lives. So when you're asking a survey or writing something in a survey, don't be too surprised if you're asking completely the wrong questions, because you can't see into their heads. You can't see the experiences of your prospective customers that change the way they think. So what I'm really saying here is that, if you're a scientist, you think bias is a terrible thing. If you're an entrepreneur, you think bias is a source of opportunity. Because if there's enough people with the same bias, they're probably not being served, and they're really quite desperate to be served. But you won't know that unless you have a really dialogical conversation with them. So do a focus group and make it really broad. And I could share this slide, but I haven't got it to hand. The way we typically do this is we start with a survey, go with as many people as you possibly can, ask some quite general questions about the nature of the problem that you're looking at, and say, look, if this is an area of interest to you, then just tick this box, send us your contact details, and then we'll have a conversation with you later. Now, that does two things. The first thing is it starts to work out who amongst all the people you're surveying is interested. So you've already started to get a biased market. And a biased market is what you want. You're not interested in the people who don't care. You're only interested in the people who do. And surveying and asking people to opt in to further is basically saying, if you're not interested, please go away politely. Otherwise, yes, please, let's have a talk. And then you have a talk, but you have what we call a semi-structured interview. which is you've got a broad area that you want to ask about, but you want to give the floor to your customers, say, to answer questions like, what is it that I'm not even thinking about that's important to you? And that then starts to give you a much, much more interesting and detailed view about what the problem really is. And just take the example of the lady that was talking about her gamification. You know, it's not until you actually start to talk about it in the terms of their customers and say, well, how does this problem materialize in your experience? And then they say, oh, well, look, it's this. You know, what I really where I have a real challenge is this, and it looks like this to me. And then they hear that and think, well, there's 2 or 3 other people who've kind of used the same context, kind of used the same words. So if I can use those words, then I'll find another bunch of people for whom that resonates. And gradually, I'll build up this motivated market, which is essentially a market segment who are driven by a desperation to achieve a similar kind of outcome. Does this make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, Mark. There's another question here from Temi Tope. She's asking, please, I would like to know if venture studios are a legitimate source of funding, because a certain venture studio indicated interest in funding my idea in exchange for 10% equity and a very high training fees that I couldn't afford to pay. First of all, this is just reminding me of Set Squared. Although I don't think Set Squared would take equity from you, I'm not sure. What do you think, Mark?
Look, with all of these things, you sometimes feel honored. You sometimes feel, oh, someone's actually paying attention to me, and you feel a kind of obligation to jump at some of these offers. I think you need to be very skeptical. You need to look very carefully what's in it for me and what are they getting out of it. And could I, if I just hung on a little bit later, get a much better offer from somewhere else? And, you know, if they're offering very high training fees that you can't afford, well, that sounds to me like actually they're going to make their money out of you whether your venture succeeds or not. Is that really the deal that you want to do? Wouldn't you rather be working with someone who's got a little bit more skin in the game, that they want you to succeed, and because they want you to succeed, they're going to help you to succeed rather than making money out of helping you to succeed? So, you know, that's the way I would view these things. I can't obviously give you an answer without knowing the specifics, and I don't think that's really appropriate on a call like this. But be skeptical, and remember, you may not think this, but you're worth a lot more than you think you are. If you're going to solve these problems for hundreds or thousands of people, you are incredibly valuable. So don't give yourself away at too cheap a price. Because there are a lot of, you know, I sometimes call them vulture capitalists, and kind of clues in the name. How are we doing?
Good, good, good.
So,
Sophia, do you have a question? Okay. I thought I saw a hand raised. No problem.
So I'm going to spend a bit more time now. We spent nearly half the time talking about sources of funding, and we've got through about 6 out of possible 30 slides. I'm not proposing to go through all of them, but what I will do is just talk a little bit about how we pitch. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is kind of saying the same as that little slide I sort of opened up with. Start with the position, the problem, the origin. Where's all this come from? Why are you doing what you're doing? The thing you have to do from the get-go with one of these pitches is recognize that this is your life's work, and you're talking to someone who hasn't a clue what you're on about. They haven't been through the experience that you have, and they are filtering everything you say through their own experience. So one of the things that you really need to do right at the offset is to sort of ground them so that they get what the problem is. And the best way to do that is a really powerful image. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so what are you doing? How are you making a difference? Why are you going to succeed when everyone else who's been in this space is not? Because that's the killer question. If it was that easy, everyone would have done it. So what's the secret sauce, if you like? What is it that you're doing? Why are you the best? And what you can become. So don't think about just why you're the best. And you know, we're all very, especially us English people, we don't like blowing our own trumpet. And I'm not going to speak to any other particular culture here, but generally speaking, the best people are the people who don't tell everyone how good they are. The people who tell everyone how good they are usually the people who aren't that good, if we're honest. So you have to really, and I keep saying this, you've got to recognize that your value. For a start, you've got off your backside and done something about this, which already puts you in the minority. So that's a great thing. But that's starting thing. But what could you become? You know, if in 5 years' time everything went really well, what would the world look like, and what would make it, or at least your small corner of it, that much better? What's your vision? Yeah. All right. And then you kind of reach the climax. You know, you've painted a picture of a world or a part of the world that is that much better, that why wouldn't anyone want to support it? Okay, you've got them up to that point, and then you're starting to say, right, okay, from that point, what do I need from you to make this happen? And essentially that is all there is to a pitch. So hopefully that makes sense. So let's just think about what that looks like. Okay, so you're quite technical. Here is the opening slide from one of the people who I've been working with, who actually had a really, really good product. Let me show you the alternative that we suggested to them. Which one of those two grabs your attention? It's a rhetorical question. Hopefully it's blindingly obvious.
Yes, this 2 billion in fines.
Yeah, of course, of course. So what that previous slide was doing was it was saying this is a tool that allows you to detect a very small quantity of gas in the atmosphere. All right. And what they'd illustrated is where someone had had a big industrial accident because they hadn't illustrated, they hadn't been able to get, you know, sense this particular escape piece of gas. So what I'm saying is, if you start with that and you've got a fireball and you've got a big number, you've got people's attention. All right. So if you're technical, let me give you a clue. Nobody buys technical stuff. They buy outcomes. And they don't care how your product does it, apart from to be reassured that it does do what you promise. What they're really interested in is what it will do for them. So the first slide should always be a really, really obvious picture of what it does for them. One of the ones in our recent funding competition that won some money, they'd created a very interesting product that made sewage treatment plants more efficient. And they wanted to show a picture of these kind of little spongy things that reacted to light and digested bacteria a lot quicker. I said, don't do that. Show a picture of a sewage pipe spewing out muck into a nice clean or previously clean river. And then when he saw it, he said, yeah, I get that. That's the problem. The fundamental problem is that we're squirting sewage into the environment. How can we stop it? Well, this product makes your sewage treatment plant a lot more efficient. So hopefully you get that as an impression. Very few words, very dramatic picture. And hopefully you've seen me trying to do that with that picture of all those people queuing up outside the loo. You automatically realize in words that I can't describe what we're talking about, and you'll have your own experience from an image that you can conjure up and say, yeah, I can see that. I can see how this is relevant to me, and you're already starting to get people excited about it. So use an image, use a really carefully thought image to illustrate what the problem is as your opening gambit. Then you've grounded them. They're already starting to think about the area that you're in. And we've got to be very careful with words. Even the word pitch, I use this a lot with my students. How many different meanings of the word pitch can you think of? Have a little think. Let's see. Anyone want to put in the chat the highest number of words the meanings they can think of for pitch?
Presentation.
Sorry?
Presentation.
Okay, yes, so that's one. I can think of 8 different meanings for pitch. So there's the musical context of pitch, like in a pitchfork or the pitch that you sing at. There's the sports context of pitch, as in a pitch is a place, a piece of ground where you play games, but also pitch as in throwing. Pitch has got an engineering connotation in terms of the number of repetitions of something, like the numbers of threads in a screw, the number of seats in an aeroplane. So what I'm saying here is that if you're not careful, you'll say a word and they'll think of an alternative meaning for that word that they don't get, that is completely irrelevant. And then they'll be sitting, scratching their head, thinking, I don't understand this pitch because they're talking about this thing in a way that doesn't make sense to me. So this is why, a picture really is worth 1,000 words. Okay, there you go. What does that do to you? Probably wants anything like me, it makes you want to throw up, to be honestly. You can't read it, you don't understand what it is. Make it really, really simple and compare that to the previous slide with very few words, but a really striking image. Don't do it. Don't try and get too much information in. Just think of the killer and very important message, single or maybe 2, maximum 3 messages that you want your clients to go away with, your audience to go away with, and try and make it as relevant to them as you possibly can. Yeah, all this sounds really obvious, but use a nice picture. Okay, so this is a standard 10 slides model. It doesn't have to be in this order, but a typical 10-minute pitch would be around about a minute on each of these. So the first one, intro background, what I've just described, an image that gets them really grounded and thinking about it. And then a little bit more specific, because 2 billion fines and a big fireball isn't going to be that relevant to people. But if you can then say to them, well, look, how worried about this particular aspect are you? I mean, we could think about, was it CrowdStrike the other day that brought down half the world's IT? So you can see that, simple things in technology, in theory, can have massive consequences. And if your customers are worried that if they get something wrong, then the results could be quite catastrophic to them, and that what you're doing is giving them assurance that that big problem is less likely to happen, it's worth quite a lot to them. So talking about the problem, the worst possible outcome that they could face, and how you're going to stop that from happening. Or if you can do it the other way around, something that they dream about, what if you could have this? Yeah, I want some of that. Okay, well, read on then, and we'll talk about how you get it. So problem, the sort of inverse of a problem is the opportunity, if you like. And problem, we all talk about problems in this space, but in a way, opportunities are more powerful. And if you can show something that they dream about, but have no idea how to obtain, and then you can show them how you could help them get it, in a way that's more powerful, even though the psychology of humans is that we would rather avoid a risk than gain an opportunity, because we're more worried about risks than we are about opportunities. Okay, so here's the problem. Here's what it is, and it's contextualized for the audience so that you've had enough conversations with people in their particular position that you can describe it in a way that they understand. Yes, I can see how that would happen to me, and that's the important thing. Okay, then the solution says, okay, so here's a problem. Here's how we're going to make it go away, or here's how we're going to realize that opportunity. And the solution's got to be something that they can see, yes, okay, the problem resonates with me, and I'm now starting to develop confidence that you are the person who's going to make this happen for me. So with your solution, you need to be talking about a little bit about why you're going to succeed, why other people haven't. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Okay, so that's the solution. How do you operationalize that solution is in your product or service. So here's what we do. We develop this particular, intervention, call it that, this project, this particular piece of software, whatever it may have to be. And that's how it develops the solution. So you need to be satisfying people that your product will actually solve their problem, because otherwise they're thinking, well, that's lovely, but I have no confidence in you, go away. Okay, so the next thing up there is the market size. The market size is important for investors. It's less important for customers because they don't really care about anyone else. But if you're talking to investors or you're trying to get a loan, you need to demonstrate that the ability for you to be able to repay either of those investments in the future by getting a relatively modest share of a growing market, you know, it's much more likely then. If you can say that if I only get 4% of this market, I can still repay everything that you've lent me and a heck of a lot more besides, then they're thinking, okay, yeah, I can see that this is not, you know, if you have to get 150% of the market to be able to afford it back, then clearly it's not a great venture. So market size, people get very agitated. I was talking to one of my postgrad students just yesterday about this, is you don't have to be decimal point accurate. You have to be in the right order of magnitude for people to think, yes, this is a problem that's worth investing time and effort in, because there's enough people with it that there's a sporting chance you'll be able to capture enough of them to make a viable business. Okay, so that's the setup. Is that a question?
Yes. How do you determine the market size?
Ooh, there's a whole hour we could spend on that, but essentially there's two ways of doing it. The first one is what we call bottom up, and that if you look at your particular customers and think, okay, my particular customers are in this particular area, how many of them are there? Okay, so how many contexts could we think of for my product? How many businesses are there out there that are in this space that could potentially benefit from it? And that's the sort of bottom up view. The top down view is when you can get access to data, you can get hold of some sort of market intelligence data. And I think the answer to that is in some countries, it's a lot more available than it is in other countries. And you may well be in countries where such data isn't particularly gathered. And quite often to get hold of that data, you need to pay quite a lot of money unless you can get access to it through some form of library. Or if you've got access to a research institution like a university, you can sometimes get it that way. So the top down would be the various market studies that are done by organizations, usually for sale, that say how many people are buying this kind of thing. So that very quick, for you, I think the answer is how many people are there in a particular industry that you think you could sell your product to. And you know, it can only be quick and dirty because you haven't got time to really get into that in a lot of detail. I don't know if that's helpful. I'm afraid that's pretty generic and I've not really got into detail, but I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes, it does.
Okay, now thinking about the deal here. So you've talked about the opportunity on the left. You know, this is the opportunity. On the right, you're really talking about how you're demonstrating that you are going to make that opportunity come to life. So the first question is, okay, so you've got this product. My rule of thumb here is that a product is worth about a quarter of what the business model's worth. You could have a brilliant, brilliant product, but if no one knows about it, it's completely useless. So your business or your revenue model is actually where you make your money, because that's the way you get your product in front of the people who are most prone to buy it, and you describe it in such a way that it is a no-brainer to them. So your business model, you've probably talked about the business model canvas, very, very useful tool. You can use the business model canvas at so many different levels. I've seen people who've just put initial thought on it, and I've seen people who've used it to get really, really deep into the relationship between the product and the outcome for the customer, and who's the absolute best fit customer, how to describe the value proposition in such a way that it's highly segmented and highly relevant to relatively micro segments of the market. So this is what you want to be getting to in your business model. It's really thinking about what offer do I need to get in front of which people, and how am I going to do it, and how many of them am I going to be able to do? So what's the way that you get the offer in front of the ideal customer in enough volume that you're really going to fill your coffers enough that you've got a very successful business? Part and parcel of that is the competition. Who else is in this space, and what are you doing that they're not? Now, in many ways, if you're in an early stage and small business, there could be hundreds of people doing the same kind of thing. But if you're talking to investors who are looking for the next unicorn, by which I mean, you know, a really massive globally dominating business, you've got to talk about why you're going to be the one that wins that race compared with everyone else. And also, this is part of your business model in saying why they're going to buy from you and not from all these other people. What is your, some people call it your secret sauce, unfair advantage, various ways of describing it. What are the other people up to, and why are you going to win when they're not? So the next piece is the team. Okay, so a lot of venture capitalists, in particular angels, likewise buy on the team rather than the product, because they think, well, even if the product changes like 180 degrees, that doesn't matter because the team will still make me money. So what you want to be demonstrating in the team is why you are the right people for the job. What insights have you got? What access to resources have you got that means that you're going to succeed rather than somebody else who's starting out with the same, with the same venture? So going back to SASIE and, thinking effectually, really think hard about the relationships you've got, the knowledge you've got, and how that sets you apart. And if in the process of doing this, right, before you do your pitch, you realize that there are other people who are far better, far more likely to do it than you are, but maybe they're not motivated, how can you bring them on board? How can you, leverage your team to show that you're going to get out there in the market? Which brings us on to this next crazy venture capital type term, traction. Now, to me, traction is how you pull something along. But in investment speak, traction is the extent to which you're gaining interest in the market. Now, depending on the stage you're at, you can either demonstrate you've got lots of paying customers, which is always good. But if you're at an earlier stage than that, and you can demonstrate that people, for example, have funded you on a crowdfunder, they haven't got the product in their hands, but they've demonstrated an intent to purchase, then that's a pretty good way of demonstrating traction. And if, as I was talking about in the motivated market, you can show that there's maybe 50 people who are really helping you to create this product, the fact that they're putting in all that effort is a very clear indication that they want the outcome. So depending on where you are in your life cycle, if you like, you demonstrate traction in lots of different ways. And you pick the one for where you are. If you're worried that you haven't got like 100,000 customers and you've only been at it for a few weeks, well, that's not really surprising, and people will get that. So don't think that there's only one way to demonstrate traction. What you need to be doing for your own sake, quite apart from your investors, is demonstrating that you're not wasting your time. And you're not wasting your time because you know there's a lot of people who want you to succeed. And that ultimately is what traction is. And how you demonstrate it is up to you. Play to your strengths is all I would say. And then finally, we're on to the financials. This again is really for profit, but also for non-profits. They're kind of interested in impact. So financials is, here's how much it's going to cost, here's how much we sell it for, here's the volumes, and here's how this will return a sizable return on the investment. And you need to be demonstrating what venture capitalists are looking for is a 10 times return on their investment. And obviously what loan people are looking for is an interest rate, call that 10% return on their capital. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that if you take out a loan, after you've paid all the other costs of your business, there's still going to be enough surplus cash that you can service that loan and pay it off without really having to not sell anything because you can't afford to pay the salespeople, if that makes sense. So you've got to demonstrate that it's going to throw off enough of cash. Your operating activities are going to throw off enough cash to pay back the investors in whatever form it is. If it's a philanthropist, they're interested in impact. So how can you demonstrate the social benefit that you're doing? How can you demonstrate that you're delivering more social benefit than they could get elsewhere? And so this is really where the competition applies in social ventures. Who else is in this space? Who else is doing stuff? And why are they not succeeding where you will? So that, if you're if your philanthropists are looking for the best source of impact, they're looking at you thinking, yeah, I can see why I would get more bang for my buck by investing in your product than by doing it for those other folks. So that's essentially the 10 slides model. What I would say to you is minimum words, maximum pictures. If you can have a nice diagram of your business and revenue model, that makes sense. I'm going to whistle through some of the rest of this because it's quite straightforward. Okay, so this is another way of looking at it. And again, you'll be able to have the recording here so you can go through this in a little bit more detail. I don't really want to go through this in much detail because it's kind of saying the same things as the last one. Shuffling the order, different
Hi,
options.
Mark, if I might stop you, I saw something in the last slide that said, don't disclose the IP. What does that mean, please?
Right, okay, so you're doing something technical. If you've got some intellectual property that could be valuable in terms of, you know, the reason why you're succeeding and other people haven't is because you've got a secret ingredient, should we say. There is never any reason why you should disclose that secret ingredient. All you need to say is we have developed some technology that enables us to ... whatever it may happen to be. You need to talk about the outcome of that piece of technology, but you don't need to disclose how it works in enough detail that someone could copy it. Your investors aren't going to be interested in that until you've got until they're really interested in investing in you. You don't want to be telling them until they're willing to sign non-disclosure agreements and various other bits and pieces like that. When they've got to the point where they're going to invest in you and it's not in their interests to share it with anyone else, that's the point where you should be prepared to share it. Because we could talk about intellectual property. There's lots of people get very excited about patents. Early stage businesses very rarely can afford patents. And even if you spend $5,000, $10,000 on achieving a patent, that's only as valuable as your ability to defend someone in court who says, I see your patent, I'm going to ignore it, sue me. All right. And then you're looking at $100,000 plus to defend it. And if you haven't got $100,000, then you may have a patent, but that doesn't stop people walking all over it. So don't get too excited about intellectual property and patents. It's not really worth it unless you're likely to become a multi-billion, dollar business, in which case it becomes much more important. Does that answer the question? I hope so. Okay. Okay. So again, this is sort of thing about the psychology of the audience. Anchor them. As I said, get them already thinking in terms of what you're trying to do. Get them settled so that you're starting to do stuff that is a natural flow. Give them something so they know what's going on. So that's really, really a little bit of signposting. So I've talked about the 10 slides. You can say, look, in the introduction, I'm going to tell you my idea. Here's the real problem. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the solution and how we're going to capitalize on the market and finish up with the R so that they know what's going on. And think about, this is kind of the elevator pitch, this number 4. If you were stopped in the street by someone and just asked a little bit about what you do, how would you describe what you're doing in such a way that they would be immediately interested? So if you can think really in terms of the key message that you really want them to walk away with, that's really important. Okay, so this was one of our previous lectures. Lots of words here, probably more than I can think of, but what we've got here is a mum. You can tell it's a mum because there's like a rocking horse in the background and kids' toys all over the floor.
Mark, there's a question here. Please, how can I incorporate storytelling to make my pitch more memorable and relatable?
So the answer to that is, if you're working with lots of people and you're co-creating a solution, they'll give you stories. So don't be in an ivory tower. Don't do this on your own. The best way to really have an engaging and storytelling pitch is to work with lots of people who are your prospective customers. get them to tell you stories, and then you can put these stories in. If you're on your own, it's incredibly hard unless you do some research, in which case you're kind of telling the same old stories that everyone else is telling, and then your uniqueness disappears. I think one of the things that Saraswati is very keen on saying is that, entrepreneurs don't do this stuff on their own. They have lots and lots of conversations. And I think it's absolutely true. You have lots and lots of conversations, and it's those conversations that shape your pitch, but also give it real resonance, because you're talking to the real life challenges that people are facing, not some kind of generic, prototype of a person. When you can talk about a story and people say, yes, that's happened to me, you've got their attention. When you can talk about a story in a kind of very generic way, they kind of say, yeah, you can read about this in a book. Why am I listening?
Yeah, that's true. Can social media following be used or be considered as traction?
Yes, absolutely. Up to a point. We could talk about vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are followers are only so interesting. More interesting is the extent to which they're engaging. So if you've got lots of followers, that's kind of interesting, but it's not very useful. But if 10% of 100,000 people are actively engaging with you, then you've got 10,000 people who are keen and interested in demonstrating that they're interested in what you're trying to do. And more interesting than that, they're probably giving you feedback, and they're telling you stories, and they're giving you examples, and they're possibly even pointing you in directions that you hadn't thought about. So a lot of what I talked about in terms of co-creation, you can to a certain extent do on social media. We just have to be a little bit careful with social media, because, lots of time people are on social media because they want to create an image about themselves, which isn't strictly true. They're portraying themselves as they would like to be seen rather than as they actually are. So it can be a little bit misleading. So just be a little bit careful with that one.
All right, thank you.
All right, moving on. Evidence of problem really powerful. So, here's the conversations that you've had with people. Consumers said, I hate this, I don't like that, I wish I could, etc. And if you've got these, and ideally you've got genuine photographs, although in reality nobody would really know, they're not going to phone them up, then you start to see, you've got this picture that it's not just me thinking there's this problem, but there's all these other people, and they're saying it like this. You can see how that is a lot more powerful than a pie chart that said 46% of people said this, or agreed, or quite or strongly agreed with. Real words, real people. We resonate with those an awful lot more. So if you can include those, that's really helpful. Okay, and then here's your value proposition. Okay, here is the beneficiary, this kid, slightly out of focus because he's not actually the customer. The product, as you can see, is a web app, in this case on a mobile phone app. And then there's 4 lines here telling you what the product does. So that's your solution in a single sentence if you can. And again, a nice picture if you possibly can. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. And the fact that you've got a picture of a phone here, it kind of grounds the view of the investor or the customer or whatever. Okay, so we're talking about a mobile app here. I get what this is working about, what this is talking about. Okay, market size slide. Okay, so this is for Airbnb. The way they do it, how many trips are booked worldwide, and in the small print there, you may not be able to see it, is the source. Where have they come up with this data from? Okay, so then, so this is a kind of the top-down view, 2 billion plus trips. We reckon that we're really talking about the budget sector, so that's 560 million, so that's around about a quarter of the 2 billion. And the ones that we're attacking or going for is 84. And when you look at that, you look at 84 million as a share of 2 billion and say, okay, that's not a massive share of the market. It sounds reasonably doable. But at the same time, 84 million, that's a pretty interesting market. You know, even if each of those customers is only paying you like 5 cents or whatever, that's still a pretty interesting market. So what you're trying to do with your market size slides is to show A, that it's a big market, and B, that you're looking for a share that is not ridiculous. That even if you make a relatively small share of a big market that's eminently doable, you can still make quite a lot of money. That's really the purpose of the market size slides. Okay, other way of looking at it. You can see here, there's different ways of looking at it. You can do your particular country, you can talk about the world. I'm hoping that most of you have, if not immediately, but in the longer term, global ambitions. You know, just because you're coming from parts of Africa, it doesn't mean that you can't dominate the world. Go for it. Okay, competition slide. So here are different ways of presenting a competition slide. So top left here, here's the various competitors and here's what they offer. And then somewhere in there, you're going to have us down the bottom there. You know, and the obvious thing is we've got 3 ticks and none of the other competitors have. So it's really blindingly obvious what's wrong with the competitors. You don't say that they're bad. You just point out in very factual terms, they don't do this. We do. And here's the evidence that customers are looking for the thing that they're not doing. Okay, so down below a 2x2 matrix, if you can think of something that really says, well, you know, there is a big market here, but most of the competitors are operating in this part of it. And there's evidence that there's another part of the market that really isn't being well served. And that's why we're in that space. So that's why you might have that kind of blue one. The other way of looking at it is, you know, we use this quite a lot, where you look at, you know, different attributes of a product, high cost, low quality, high quality. That's quite straightforward. In technical terms, you might be thinking in terms of the degree to which your technology is easily brought in alongside other systems. If it's plug and play, as opposed to they have to throw away everything that they've already invested in, that might be a good one. Might be something around the usability. It might have very good functionality, but all the market competitors, you have to go on like a 6-month training course to be able to use it. Whereas yours, it kind of works out of the box. You give people a YouTube video and away they go. It might be something along those lines that you put on there to compare yourself with the other people in the market. And the real thing you're trying to show here is why you're going to succeed when all these other people who are kind of doing the same thing are not. And that's really what this is about. Okay, business model. I talked about a diagram if you possibly can. So this on the left, we take a 10% commission on each transaction. There you go. You can see immediately, you know, this many trips, average fee, this is our revenue. And that's really straightforward. Two-sided market, often you'll be in a place where you're actually intermediating between a business customer and a consumer customer. And when you're doing that, you've obviously got to have 2 value propositions, one to the business customer and one to the consumer. And you will ideally make money from both of them, if you possibly can, by doing the same product. But when you've got a two-sided market, you do need to recognize that if you're only feeding one side of it, then the other side is going to fall over at some point. So you know, you've got to keep these things working in parallel and show how you're going to do that. Does this whole two-sided market thing make sense, or am I talking some crazy foreign language?
You're making sense, Mark.
Okay, good. Just checking. Okay, so we talked about traction or how you'll get it. So here's some of the ways that you might be thinking about reaching your market. So we've got here sources of traffic. So paid advertising, we know about, you know, you can pay for adverts wherever they happen to be. Online is quite popular. Social media, probably more so. Partners, so these are people who are going to, you know, who are interested in you succeeding for their own purposes. Affiliates are folks who will make money. These are influencers who sell their space, essentially who sell their audience, if you like, for a fee. Influencers are, we know who influencers are, but how do you get traffic from them? Well, if they are keen on this thing that you're doing, then they'll talk about you to their crowd. You may pay them a little bit, but where they're different from affiliates is affiliates will have a link on their website that says, you know, they'll do a blog post, they'll do a review of products, and yours will be in there, and there'll be a button on there that says, if you want this product, click here. And every time someone clicks on that, you give them some money. So that's how affiliate marketing works. Influencers, it's a slightly more complicated relationship in that you may pay them to do a blog promoting what you're doing, but it's not a per transaction. And then organic is obviously stuff you get yourselves. So all this traffic's out there. So all of these people who are vaguely interested in your product, how do you get them from the point that they're curious to the point that they've actually bought it? So then this is how you get the conversion from interest into sales, the way you do it, and then that's how you get sales. So really you need to be demonstrating that you're picking on 1, 2, maybe 3 of the sources of traffic, how it converts and how it turns into sales. Because the last thing people want to invest in is what I would call a best kept secret, which is an absolutely fabulous product that nobody buys because they don't know about it. But if they did, they'd pay a fortune for it. And that can be a real problem with folks who are thinking, but of course everyone will like their product. Well, they won't if they don't know about it. And you've got to put a huge amount of effort into getting it in front of people. Let's think how many people are bothering you for your time, you know, all the web stuff that you see, all the feeds that you have, social media feeds, all these people are vying for your attention. How do you get your product in amongst all of that to be, oh, okay, yeah, I can see why I want to get off my backside and do something about this, as opposed to, oh yeah, here's another one, move on. So this is really important for you to think about. Okay, team slide, absolutely vital, because you're really trying to do nothing more than to demonstrate that you've got the skills to make this stuff happen. So not really interested in someone's, you know, the head of the basketball team or whatever. Who do they know? What do they know? And how are they going to help you? What specific expertise have they got that means that you're going to succeed where other people haven't? And the ideal with your team is to have a really balanced team with a variety of skills so that you can cover all the bases. There's definitely some research that shows that no entrepreneurial venture with a single founder has ever got that far. It just doesn't happen. It's when you get the diversity of skills involved working together so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
So Mark, one of the things when people were applying to attend this program was that you didn't need to be a tech person, like know how to code, etc. So what would be your tip if women on this program are trying to recruit a technical co-founder who would actually do the tech part of it?
I think there's a lot of people who are in technology who are looking for meaning. And you may think, well, hang on, they code. Surely they don't, you know, they're not human. Well, actually they are when they're not coding. And so if you can show them a way that they could take their technical skills and turn them into real world impact, that can have, you know, on a human level, that can be incredibly attractive. Of course, the other thing is to say, look, we're on a venture, we're on a train that's leaving the station and it's going to go ridiculously fast. You want to be on it, mate. So talk about the opportunity that you're creating for them in terms of, you know, the possibility of making quite a lot of money. And let's face it, in a lot of African countries, the formal jobs market is much smaller than the informal jobs market. So if there's folks with technical skills who are perhaps not finding it easy to find paid work of the sort that they want, and I don't know to what extent that's the case, yeah, you're giving them an opportunity whereby you may not be able to give them a lot of money up front, but you're giving an option to get quite a lot of money in the future. So this is the 2 ways. There's the human level, that your venture is really exciting, it'll make a difference to people, and there's the kind of financial one that, you know, this could turn into something amazing and you'll be really regretting it in 5 years' time that you had this opportunity and you didn't snap it up. That's what I'd suggest.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, so finance slide. This looks complicated, but in fact it isn't. You've got 3 lines here, right? You've got the total cash or the free cash, operating cash flow, and yeah, so essentially what you can see here, the green line at the beginning, that's the investment. You can show that you start off with your 200,000 investment, you get down to the point where you're on 0, and then you go cash flow positive. And then if you follow the green line, you can see that the green line ends up much higher at the end than it is at the beginning. So the operating cash flow you can see is red. So that really is the point where you start making money. Yeah, so you can look at this slide and you can look at the date and say, okay, so I can see the size of the investment. I can see the size of the opportunity on the right. I can see the time, which is the bottom of the blue curve or the bottom of the green curve, if you like. It'll take before the business is starting to generate enough money to pay people back. And the break-even point there on the right, you can see is where, net of investment is the point where you're starting to make money after you've paid off all your investment. So if you can have a slide like this, that really talks about your financing, operations, and your sales, then you can convey in something that an investor can see in 5 seconds the shape of your finances. Does that make sense?
It does. Could you explain break even, the break even point?
Okay, so let's just think that you needed to take out $10,000 of loan. Okay, so that's this kind of orange arrow that says investment. So, or in this case, it's 220,000 pounds, I think this is, or euros, or whatever, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what the units are, just over 200,000 is. So by the time you've paid back that investment, you've got enough, you've then broken even. You don't have any obligations to anyone else. Anything else is kind of your profit. That's really what break even means. So you get to a point that might take you 2 or 3 years before you've paid back all that you owe people to get you to the point where you're generating enough surplus from your sales that that you can actually start to pay yourself something, pay yourself dividends or whatever. So that's what the break even is.
Okay.
We've got 5 minutes left, so should we just leave it at that, because we've kind of got to the end. The only last one is basically the ask. What do you want? What do you want? Don't forget what it is that you want, because they'll sit there and think that's really interesting, but what's the next step? And if you don't put in the next step, you've potentially lost the opportunity, because they'll go away and think, well, that was kind of interesting, and then nothing else happens to it. And it's because you haven't asked them to do anything. So follow up, ask them for something, and then follow it up, because people are busy, and just because they don't get back to you doesn't mean that they're not interested. It might mean that, like, they've lost your email address or something really ridiculously stupid, and they'll soon tell you to go away if you're bothering them too much. Okay, how's that?
Sounds great. There's actually a question here. When you're pitching, can there be more than one person doing the pitch, or is it best for one person to do the whole pitch, especially when you have a team?
I think the most powerful pitches are where you have specialists talking about their bit. So if you've got a finance specialist and they present the finances, that looks better than the person who's writing the code presenting the finances. And likewise, when you're talking about the solution, if you get the person who's writing the code to talk about it, or the designer, depending on how your product is, then they're the obvious person to ask questions that come from left field, because they've got all the background knowledge that you've decided that you weren't going to present, because otherwise you'd have 500 slides and it would take you 4 hours and everyone would have lost the will to live.
Okay.
So get a team together if you possibly can, but it depends. There are some coders I'm being very rude here about coders, but there are some coders who really you wouldn't want to be seen in public. You probably know the sort of person who I mean. They just don't have any social skills. So if they're that sort of person, then they're not really the right person to put in front of an investor. But at the same time, if you've got a chief technology officer, one of the skills of a chief technology officer is to make complicated IT stuff sound simple, that even dullards like investors can understand it. So that itself is a skill. You don't want to be selling geekery because everyone will fall asleep.
Yeah. So if I've done my market research, I've found some traction, people are interested, they're signing up, giving me their email addresses. If I were to put together a team, what would be the most basic team of people to put together, assuming I am the business person?
Okay, so the best advice is to find people who can do stuff in areas and they're better at it than you are. So depending on what your particular skill set is, you want people who are able to go out and engage other people. Some people are very good at ideas, but they're not very good at engaging other people. Other people are very good at engaging, but once they've engaged them, actually they don't have very much to say to them. So that's one part of it, is the engagement in the ideas. That's partly a sales role and partly not a sales role. It becomes a sales role later. So sales is another important thing. Sales and marketing, there's a skill to understanding, to being able to navigate the millions of different ways there are of getting your, baiting your hook and putting it in the right pool to catch the right fish. The plethora of different, I can think of at least 50 different routes to market. I've got a little slide that I haven't got with me, but I don't mind sharing it, which actually comes from a book called Traction that talks about, it's a kind of, what do you call it, a mind map of different ways of reaching the market. There's so many different ways of reaching the market. You've got to work out which is the best way of doing it, and that's kind of marketing. Obviously, someone's got to build this wretched thing, whatever it may happen to be. So you're going to need someone who is skilled at either product design and product manufacture if it's a physical product, or coding if it's a technical product. And coding isn't just writing code. There's usually a piece about databases to be dealing with. There's a piece about security. There's a piece about support, because at the end of the day, very rarely do customers instantly get it that they don't need any help. So how are you going to help them on the journey of getting familiar with your product and using it? So there's that element as well. So all of that is kind of product related. There may be, you're certainly going to need someone who can do the numbers for you with a bit of credibility. So all of these are the different kind of skills that you need. There's a sort of view that you need at least 3 people. One person who's kind of driving it, one person who's on the kind of delivery of the product, and another one who's on the kind of getting it out there, the business model, the engagement type thing. That's the important skills.
Okay, so someone is asking, do you have a pitch presentation template we can use, and can we get the slides?
I can't answer the latter question, but I'm sure you can, Jen. I'm very happy to share them if that's what you mean.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I don't know how big they are, because I'll have a look, but they're probably a ridiculous number of megabytes because I like lots of pictures. But if you've recorded this, I don't know if there's a way that you can record it and put it on a kind of some sort of shared drive so people can access it.
Yeah, we upload it to YouTube, so definitely they can get the recording, but I believe they would want the slides as well. I can get it from you and share. That's very possible.
Well, I think if you look at some of the earlier slides, I mean, when I talk about a template, you don't want to use my template because you want to make it your own. But in the earlier slides in the pitch section, there is, 3 or 4 different ways of presenting your kind of standard 10 slides. So if they use that as the template, that's what I would suggest. If you try and turn this into something that works for you, I can guarantee you will spend more time doing that, trying to adjust it, than going onto Canva or one of those kinds of things and just thinking, okay, so here's the message that I want to do on each. And you can do this on a notebook in, boring old ballpoint pen. on a page and say, okay, so here's the sort of 10 slides and here's what they're trying to do. This is the one about the solution. Okay, how do I describe the solution in a sentence? And, you know, it's going to take a bit of refining to do that. And once you've done that, then think about how you're going to present it and what's the best image to really get the message across. And you're going to have to spend a lot of time on that. And I don't know if you're familiar with people like Pixabay. There's about 3 or 4 really good image companies where you don't have to pay to use them. And all they ask is that you credit them in certain cases. Worth knowing about those, because then you can put really high quality images. For goodness sake, when you're a startup business, don't pay to use images. But also, if you're serious about it, don't nick an image off Google and just copy and paste it, because if someone claims it, then it can be really embarrassing. And as you get successful, that's more likely to happen. So think about, there are free picture websites out there. They're not as well indexed as the paid for ones, but yeah, you can find images. All the images in these presentations have either come from someone's pitch deck that they've let me use, or else I've got them from places like Pixabay.
Awesome. So do we have any more questions? I've got a question here, but I know our time is off. Let me just throw it in. The question here is, how do we validate that we have a good idea? And at what point can one begin to spend money towards an idea?
So the answer to the first question is you can't, but your prospective customers can. And as I said right at the beginning, have lots of conversations. Lots and lots of conversations, even if it's like, I've got this vague idea that I'm going to do this. And if people engage with it, great. And if they don't, think, okay, maybe I'm not onto something here. I talked about doors right at the beginning. This is a form of knocking on doors, just having conversations with people in your normal community, people who might be interested in the vague area that you're talking about, and say, look, I think this is a problem. And if they say, yes, this is a problem, then you're starting to get some validation. And if you validate the problem first, that's really, really worth doing. I don't like the term validation because it's kind of scientific. And I don't want to get into the philosophy of truth and all that stuff, and ontology and all those other very learned things. But ultimately, it's about whether ideas resonate with people. And if people get the problem and say, yeah, I've experienced that, and do you know what I could do about it? When you get those kind of conversations, then you gradually narrow down on something that's really quite specific. But also you're asking lots of questions like, what have you tried? Because if you come up with something that they've already tried and dismissed, then you're not going to get very far. So have all those kind of conversations. Validation is the word commonly used in lean startup, but I think really what you're looking for is ideas that resonate.
Yes. Any other book recommendations apart from Traction?
Well, Traction is quite a good book from Routes to Market. It's 5 years old now. To be honest, I would recommend people read Sarasvathi's, it's only about 10 pages, What Makes Entrepreneurs Entrepreneurial. It's not new, it's 2001, but actually those ideas have not changed and they are becoming increasingly accepted. And yeah, it just explains it, but it explains it in a way that's really good. What other books? Oh gosh, there's lots that I'm reading at the moment, which isn't helpful. There's very few that I've thought, gosh, that explains things in a completely different way. That's incredibly useful. So none that I can think of immediately, because it kind of depends on what people are looking for.
Okay, no worries. Any other questions from the group before we end today's session?
Well, it's either blindingly obvious or I've baffled everyone completely and they're so confused that they don't even know where to start.
No, not at all. Okay, thank you so much, Mark, for your time. Thank you everyone for attending today. Please feel free to drop your questions in the WhatsApp group. Next week we have We have Yomi Adeinka, who will be talking about the product and how to actually build a product using no-code tools and other frameworks. So we look forward to having you, and that would be our final session. And then next week, we will tell you what our next steps are and more details about the pitching pitching event we'll be having later on in the year and all of that. Thank you so much. Grateful for your time. Have a good one. Thanks, Mark.